Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. My name is Sebastian Moore.
And I'm hilary.salt.
And we're recording today after there's been quite a few elections.
Correct.
So we've had the Canadian election,
Oh, I thought you were going to start with the UK. You've started overseas. That's fine. Yep, good.
the Australian federal election, and the UK local elections.
Didn't mention the Pope.
The Pope, another papal
Yeah.
election. We can't really analyse the electoral politics of the
No,
conclave because it's secret,
of course.
so we don't know.
Yeah,
But an American Pope.
indeed, yeah.
You happy for an American Pope?
I don't really have a fixed view, to be honest.
No.
No.
Do you know we had an English Pope once?
I'm sure we would have done before
did,
Henry VIII, presumably.
It was 1250 something.
Okay.
I think it was Nicholas Breakspear, his name was, Pope Adrian IV.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So we did do it before the Americans.
Okay, of course we did.
Otherwise, Donald Trump would be lording that over us, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would. Yeah. So we're leaving out the papal election or selection.
Yeah.
And as you said, we've had international elections and some UK elections.
Yes. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk about how we elect people.
Good.
Voting systems, and in
Okay.
particular proportional representation,
Okay.
which I'm a big fan of. Now, you wanted to talk a little bit about something different, not particularly political as such.
Well, I know that, and I felt that you would probably take up quite a bit of time doing a maths lesson on different PR systems. So I thought rather than do another heavy news item, what I would do is something that we've kept saying we would do for a long time and we keep forgetting to do, which is to just shout out to some of the people who've been providing us with some feedback. So just so that we can give everybody confidence that we do listen to your feedback. It's really important to us, and perhaps just let other people know what other people think.
Sounds good. Do you want to start with that?
Shall I? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, why not?
Okay, well, I'm going to just reach for my notes, actually,
Yeah.
because I don't want to forget anybody. Because that wouldn't be a good thing to do, would it, to our listeners, to forget people or get their names wrong or something like that. So let me start then with do you remember the edition we did with Peter Ramsey on
Yes.
The Nation, our St George's Day special? We got loads and loads of feedback on that, and I'm not going to give all the feedback. I'm just going to do some edited highlights. So sorry if I don't mention you, but let me just mention a few of the people who fed back on that one. So Simon said, I found Pete's move away from the nostalgic view of England and Britain really refreshing. He did feel that the Irish contribution was downplayed, but overall he thought it was really helpful to imagining a new UK. Paul from Leeds really enjoyed that episode and said it sparked him to consider what SDP policy should be on things like party funding. So we look forward to hearing what you think on that, Paul. Hector said he really appreciated the points on Brexit and PR and how the concerns of the elites are very different to the concerns of normal people. So we've got quite a lot of feedback on that. Do you remember the discussion on shipbuilding? That's a little while ago now, but Ian emailed in and said he really enjoyed that discussion, and he also added his own little item of information. He said that I was wondering why it was that submarines are referred to as boats, even when some of them displace more than a small ship. And he says that it's because they started life as submarine torpedo boats, and the boat designation has stuck with them ever since.
Okay.
So there we go. Every day's a school day. Josie fed back on our report to our trip to Liverpool Art Gallery. Do you remember that trip?
Oh yeah, with the statues that were a symbol of white supremacy.
That's right.
Yes,
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah. But do you remember you really enjoyed Graham Crowley's work? That was a kind of
Yes.
mustard and
I
grey
loved that, yeah.
artwork. So she actually knows Graham. And she said she would feedback to him that we liked his work and that we mentioned him. Perhaps to mention, Josie has a Substack called thebluelandscape.substack.com. So go and have a look at that if you are a great lover of art. That's really interesting Substack to have a look at. And then perhaps a few more generic bits of feedback we've had. So Nigel says, these are superb videos.
This?
Yes.
Really?
Us,
Is he watching the same thing?
Well, he said we had more substance than, and then another political party, which we ban the name of, don't we?
Okay.
Them.
What does it begin with?
Oh,
Ah.
yeah.
Reclaim.
The turquoise people. Mike says he always enjoys hearing what's happening at SDP Towers, and he also put us in touch with some other like-minded people, so thanks, Mike. Sujit's quite a frequent commentator on our podcast, and he's always very complimentary. Bravo, he says things like that, which is great. And then perhaps just to say a few comments from people who wanted to remain anonymous, so I won't name them. Somebody said that they really enjoyed the tariffs episode. That's the one that William Clouston was explaining tariffs on. This person says, it was really great to hear sensible comment on free trade and jobs. Working class communities throughout the UK have been decimated by the loss of well-paid manufacturing and heavy industry jobs to low-wage, poorly regulated countries. The long-term cost to losing those jobs, both financial and human, are massive. Free trade agreements will make this worse. We don't need free trade, we need fair trade. That's quite topical, given our free trade agreement we just signed with the US. Another contributor said they really enjoyed the fantastic interview with Claire Fox. And somebody else said, the podcast is a good discovery as an SDP supporter. I'll definitely keep listening. But they said, I'm not yet convinced about that phrase, robust left, because he thinks that describes authoritarianism like Starmer and the shift to closing down debate. But he certainly thinks we're not the soppy left.
Okay.
That's good.
That was something that was coined by Alistair Mellon all the way back in episode 2.
A long time ago.
I think we should get Alistair back on.
We should do, yes.
Regeneration spokesperson.
Correct. Yeah.
There was one other that I perhaps didn't send you, which is from Tom.
Okay.
And he said that he usually prefers the news section, but he was fascinated to hear my thoughts about football culture. Do you remember when we disagreed about the way that football culture has gone?
Yeah.
And he said mainly because I'm a Sheffield United fan, and I was referring to that match that I'd been to, Sheffield United versus Coventry City.
Yeah.
I emphasise United because he says, for next time, don't call us Sheffield. Oh. That would be like calling Man United Manchester. You should try this on Hillary.
Yeah.
If I said, you're watching Manchester today, are you?
I would say yes. There's only one team in Manchester.
Ooh, okay.
I was watching them last night, of course.
And they did very well?
You did very well, yeah. So they're through to the cup final now.
Yeah, that's the Losers' Cup final, isn't it?
Yeah. Thursday night, Channel 4. We used to be the chant in the olden days, yeah.
Right, should we get into PR?
Let's, yeah. So
okay.
Proportional representation.
Yeah, so, as I said, there's been a couple of elections recently. So Canada, Australia, and the UK local elections. Now, you'll find that this voting system that we use, which is called
First past the post,
is used mainly in pretty much only in countries that were former British colonies.
Oh, right. Okay. Nobody else does it.
Not really. Oh. If you look at the map, it's very much, India, Canada, Australia did, New Zealand did, both have changed. US, although the US, it's an electoral college, so it's slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, it's similar to our first past the post system. So, first past the post, as you'll know, means that we have these 650 mini elections in the UK where we elect a member of parliament for each constituency.
Yeah.
And let's say there's 10 people that want to be a member of parliament, which there were actually when I stood in Manchester Central.
Okay.
And the votes are divvied out fairly evenly. The person with the most votes will become the MP.
Yeah.
So you don't have to win a majority. And if you look back to, the 2019 general election, for example, how many MPs do you think won over 50% of the vote in their constituency out of the 650?
5.
5?
Yeah.
No, 135.
Oh, right, okay. More.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. So that is more. Do you mean more than 50% of the people who voted?
Yeah.
Right. So I was
Okay.
answering the question as if it was more than 50% of the constituency
That
voters.
would be very, very low. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No, but the actual people that voted, 135 won a majority, which means that in most of the seats in the country, you are represented by a member of parliament that was elected on a minority of the vote,
Yeah.
let alone a minority of the electorate.
Yes.
So first past the post, which we use in the UK, and we also use it for the local elections, like we had last week.
Yes.
They use it in Canada, and Canada has just elected Mark Carney for Prime Minister.
Ex-governor of the Bank of England.
He was indeed. Now, this is really interesting, just to look at Canadian politics for a second, because Justin Trudeau was very, very unpopular.
Yeah.
And he was becoming more and more unpopular throughout his term, knowing that they would have to fight an election by October of this year. And he resigned and was replaced by Mark Carney. And that saw a massive turnaround in the polls. So Pierre Poilievre, who's the Conservative leader.
I'm glad you pronounced that name.
Yeah. He was 25 points ahead in the polls for a long period of time. And then when Carney became leader and prime minister, there was a big turnaround. It was a huge comeback. And now Carney has just won election, and Pierre Poilievre actually lost his seat, which was interesting. And their seats actually border each other, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, didn't know that.
Nepean and Carleton are the two seats. And I thought that's interesting because in a first past the post system, you'd expect the Conservative leader with a more rural electoral base to have a very rural seat. So you take Rishi Sunak, for example, was Richmond in North Yorkshire, massive rural seat. The Conservative heartlands are sort of like southwest. I mean, Conservative heartlands is a bit of an oxymoron nowadays, but you get my point. So it's quite interesting to see that they had seats that are close together, and he actually lost his seat. Australia then, so Anthony Albanese has won re-election.
Okay.
So these are two out of what first past the post does is it creates a bit of a binary. And so advocates of first past the post say this is a good thing because you force sort of consensus around two figures, and then you can go to the country and say which of these two stories and which of these two parties do you think should be running the country? So they're supposed to be broad churches.
And it is parties, rather. You said people at first, didn't you? But we're not voting for a president.
Okay, so, this is partly it. It's very different what we're supposed to be doing and what we're actually doing.
Yes. Okay.
And so I almost would prefer if we just were honest with the electorate about what we're actually doing, which is we're voting for a person, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the last general election, Keir Starmer versus...
have you forgotten?
Oh my goodness me. Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
That's politics in 2025.
Yeah.
I was like, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, no, David Cameron, that was a long time ago. Wow. People would say, which of these should be Prime Minister? And if you look at the election debates on ITV, it's like, next Prime Minister, right? It's all of that. And so we're supposed to be voting for a local representative, but realistically, we're not. So there was a story, I don't know if you saw in the news a couple of days ago, where one of the Reform councillors who was standing for council as a Reform candidate, I think he came out saying that he thought Jimmy Savile was innocent and was a very good man, etc. And the day after the lists were announced for the election, Reform actually, what would you call that? Not disowned him, because what happens is once you're registered under that party, you're going to appear on the ballot for that party, even if the party says no, you're no longer with us. And so he came second in his seat because he's got Reform next to his name.
Yeah,
the people that are voting, very few people are looking at that going, oh, this guy, he's a really good person. He's going to be a good councillor. Yeah. Most people are voting for the party, and I don't blame them because that's what we care about. That's what we talk about. In the news constantly talks about Reform are doing really well, and this is a sign that people are upset with the government. What if people are actually voting for really good councillors and they just happen to be reform councillors?
Yeah.
We know that's not the case. So that's my first issue with first past the post, is we're voting on different things than we think we're voting on. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah. Just as an aside, you did
Yeah.
use the banned word, I think 7 times there. So we'll be getting the swear box out for you to make a contribution.
We need a little jar, don't we?
Yeah.
A little swear jar. So tell me where we're going with this, as in, jump in and ask if you think
Okay.
I'm going off track a little bit. But so first past the post, this voting system is not, and I think people, this is a real myth that we've got the way we do things currently, and then this weird foreign concept called proportional representation.
Yeah.
That probably comes from Europe, so it's
Must be bad.
About that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think people need to understand the first past the post is a voting system as much as any of the proportional representation systems are.
Yes.
So under first past the post, I think the benefits of it, and I'm not somebody that likes it, so I'm not probably the best person to kind of to speak in favour of it, but I think the benefits are that it's simple. It's very, very simple. So we know in our constituencies, we go and vote for the person we want. So we put a cross in the box. The problems with proportional with first past the post is that you don't get an accurate reflection of what the voters want. I think this is one of the biggest issues. So if you look back to the previous general election, Labour won a landslide.
Yeah.
Media kept talking about this massive landslide. They won a total of 411 seats, which was very similar to Tony Blair in 97.
Yeah.
And yet they won what percentage of the vote?
33, something like that.
33.7% of the vote.
Yeah.
And they won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in the election prior.
Yeah.
And yet that was a complete failure for Corbyn. And yet Keir Starmer has won a landslide and is now Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And the media don't seem to acknowledge the fact that Keir Starmer got fewer votes and probably isn't much more popular than Jeremy Corbyn.
Indeed.
And I'm gonna say it again, I'm afraid. Reform.
Okay.
How many votes did Reform win?
Oh, I don't know.
4.1 million.
Oh, do you know, I was going to say 4 million. I wish I'd said it now. I was a bit too lacking in confidence to
4.1 million and
say that.
5 MPs.
Yeah.
Lib Dems, 3.5 million.
73?
72 MPs. Now, I think we can have a long conversation and we can get into the nitty-gritty of proportional representation, and I can get quite geeky about this sort of stuff, and the maths and the statistics behind it. But I think it just comes down to a very, very simple fact that Reform got 5 MPs for 4 million votes and the Lib Dems got 72 MPs for 3.5 million votes. Yeah. That is not fair. And as a Brit with a keen sense of fair play, I don't like that. And I think we need a better system.
It definitely feels unfair, doesn't it? That doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Can I just throw in one reason why people like first past the post, which is the kind of local link to your local MP. So if you're voting, you're going to explain some PR systems, I'm sure, in a minute, but generally if you're voting from a list, you don't know who you're going to get, and there's no kind of connection between your constituency and your representative.
Yeah. So, proportional representation.
Okay.
This is not a voting system. I think that's what a lot of people believe it to be. It's not actually. Proportional representation is an idea that you have a voting system which is proportional.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you have proportional systems that are, let's call them very strict PR systems. So like open list, for example.
Yeah.
Where you have a list of, you vote for the parties you want, and then they have a list of the people that so if they get allocated 10 MPs, then they get their first 10.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Isn't that the way we used to do MEPs in the UK? Something like that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while since I've thought about the elections for the European Parliament, but wow. So you have different proportional systems, The proportional system I like, and I think it's probably best to talk about because we don't have hours, is something called single transferable vote.
STV.
STV, indeed. So Australia, which we mentioned before with the election last week, they also elected some of their Senate seats, and they actually use single transferable vote for their Senate seats. Now, these senators represent an area of Australia. So if you live in a part of Australia, you will have a local senator. Now, what's interesting with single transferable vote is you actually have bigger constituencies, but more people representing you. So another country uses STV, for example, is Ireland for their, I suppose you call it a general election to elect their prime minister. You vote for the candidates, but you actually rank them in order of preference.
Okay.
So you have a list of candidates and their parties, and you say, he's my first choice. If I can have anybody, I want him. He's my second choice. She's my third choice. And so on. When the votes are tallied, you have a quota that you need to reach. So if there's 4 members are going to get elected for that area, for that constituency, we can say that the quota is 25%.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're electing 4 of them and 25% of the electorate are desperate for one person, they've put that person as first choice, then realistically that person should become a member for the constituency. Now, what happens, and this is interesting about single transferable vote, is that if your vote isn't used, or if your candidate gets way more than he needed, let's say 50%, half of those votes are going to go to the second choice candidates for the people that voted. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It'd be a lot easier if I had graphs and infographics.
Yeah.
And then if that person's now reached the threshold, any extras they didn't need will then be distributed to the others.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Also, the last place candidate each round gets eliminated and their votes are used. So if you want to vote for a random candidate, for example, let's say when I stood in Manchester Central and my friends thought, I really want to vote for you, but I'm really worried that I want to send a message and get the government out. They can vote for me. And even if I become last, their second choice votes will then get used.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this process just keeps repeating until you've got 4 members.
Okay. Yeah.
With me?
Yeah, so far. Yeah.
So this is a way of making sure, and if you look at how proportional it is where it's used in Ireland and Australia for the Senate, it ranks very high in terms of proportionality. So you can look at people and say, right, this number of people voted for them as their first choice, and actually, roughly that works. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's single transferable vote.
Okay.
What this does then is it makes sure that if you're living in North Dorset, as an example, which is a very conservative seat.
Where did you get that from? What made you choose that constituency?
Because where I'm from, I suppose. I was from Mid Dorset, North Pool, but North Dorset, a little bit closer, but it's a much more stronger conservative seat.
Okay.
If you live there and you are a Labour voter and you are very, very left wing, let's say, you are not currently represented in Parliament by who you want to represent you. Under a system like single transferable vote, you'd have a few MPs, and most likely one of those is somebody you voted for.
Right.
So if you want to go to somebody that, to deal with an issue, you can go to that person. Or if you think, oh, this person actually will be better at dealing with my issue, you can go to them. So it maintains that constituency link.
So you wouldn't have lots of different people for North Dorset. You'd have lots of different people for Dorset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
bigger constituencies.
Dorset's actually a good example of this because under STV, really the minimum you can have is three members for a constituency, but it works better the more you have.
Okay.
And the maximum you'd want is about 9, and Dorset currently has 8 MPs.
Okay.
So Dorset kind of works for this. So if you live in Dorset, instead of electing somebody for your constituency, you'd elect somebody for the whole of Dorset, and you'd have 8 MPs.
Okay. It retains that local link.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that how it works in Scotland? No.
Scotland's a little bit different.
Okay.
So Scotland's system is similar to New Zealand, Germany. This is for the Holyrood elections, obviously not Westminster, and they have something that's called AMS, Additional Member System, which is like in other places it's called mixed member proportionality, and that basically is sort of a hybrid system with first past the post and a more proportional system combined, so that you can have a local MP, but it basically balances out. So you take the local MPs and you say, right, that's really proportional, so we'll allocate more MPs to sort of balance out the...
Right, kind of top up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
What do you think? Sounds good?
Yes, yes.
What are the concerns then?
So I think you've addressed the concern I had, which is that you'd still retain a local link. I suppose the other concern I have is that, and this is, often what people say when they say this is why we need to keep first past the post, is that what you end up with is governments of different compromises. So, whenever in some of these European countries there's an election, you then have to wait 2 weeks while they form some kind of an agreement between different parties who will come together to form a government. And so you don't really know what government you're voting for. You might know what party you're voting for, but that party might be part of a government with a far-right group, for example, in some of the European countries, and you perhaps wouldn't have wanted that. So it's that kind of the fact that it's a difficult way to say this is the manifesto that we want to implement, because you've no idea what manifesto you'll end up with, because it'll be some kind of a hybrid.
Yes. So this argument, what I'm about to say would probably have been harder to argue in Britain 15 years ago, but it's become easier because I think we've seen over the last 15 years that first past the post doesn't actually assuage any of these concerns. You mentioned, so there's a few things. We've got manifesto commitments. So the party lays out their manifesto. We're going to vote for that because that's what we want to happen.
Yeah.
That's not what happens now, because you don't actually get the manifesto implemented. If you look back to Conservative manifestos over the last 15 years, so few. I mean, there's a good website that actually tracks this, the percentage of pledges in the manifesto that actually get carried out, and so few of them do. And we have a media landscape which shifts so much, and everybody's forgot what was actually mentioned in the manifesto. So that's one thing. The stability argument, because this kind of links to the stability thing. So yes. I think people say it's very unstable because you've got these backroom deals happening with proportional representation, and it can combust at any point. And so this kind of is linked somehow. We haven't had much stability in the UK in the last 15 years.
That's true.
Under first past the post. And likewise, when it comes to a coalition, first past the post coalition means backroom deals after the election, like we saw in 2010.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more... none of the voters voted for that, right? If you're a Lib Dem voter, you weren't saying, I want Lib Dems to go into government with the Conservatives, and likewise with the Conservatives. Whereas proportional representation systems, often you can have it where parties will know what their voters prioritise in terms of the commitments in the manifesto, and they will say, these are our... we're not moving on these things.
Yeah.
We want these things.
Red lines.
Yeah. And I think with proportional representation, what we could have is something that's a lot more... Because let me just say, this is a good opportunity to say it's not going to solve everything. So we need proportional representation along with a few other things in order to improve our political system. But one other thing we could have is a better way of knowing what voters actually want in terms of if Labour and the Greens were going to coalition, what sort of government would that look like?
Yeah.
Right, so that before voting, you know roughly what you're voting on. I have a real issue, and I think this is probably my biggest issue with first past the post currently, is that we don't know what voters want. Right, we're constantly guessing. The media are constantly saying, well, the voters have become more right wing because they voted for the Conservatives in the 2019 general election.
Yeah.
I mean, I love this little anecdote that I have a friend, and you know this person as well, who's a communist, and she voted for Boris Johnson in 2019.
Yeah.
As well as people that are very, very on the far right
to get Brexit done.
Exactly. So we're voting on like very small single issues, and the media are constantly trying to understand what the voters really want, and it's very, very difficult with first past the post to actually know.
I think the other thing is that our big political parties, certainly the Tories and the Labour Party, are already coalitions these days. So the Labour Party is that kind of coalition of the academia and the kind of liberal elite with the kind of the bureaucracy of the trade union movement. And the Tories are some kind of very weird mix, I think, of the home counties, which is a kind of traditional stereotype you have of them, but also, you know, people who perhaps feel that they've been forgotten about. Certainly when Boris had his levelling up argument, you know, a lot of people supported the Tories for that reason. So I think there are some like weird coalitions already within the parties. So, you know, when you vote Labour, you're not really sure which bit of the Labour Party you're getting.
Yeah, and you also don't know if somebody's voting Labour because they want a particular part of the Labour Party, or if they're actually just voting against the Tories.
Yes.
You know, a third of people from the 2019 general election, when polled, a third of people said they voted tactically, meaning they didn't actually vote for the party they wanted.
Yeah.
Right, which to me is just completely nuts.
Well, tactical voting is one thing, but also there's, I think, a lot of voting against the thing that you voting for something, not for that really, but against something else. So,
but I think that tactical voting is part of that, because they're saying, right, I'm terrified of the Tories. I might really want this thing. You know, even if let's say you're a big Green fan, right, fan of the Green Party, but you say, oh, they're just not going to win here, so I'm going to have to vote Labour. And you're voting tactically, and then we look at that and say, oh, you know, the Greens aren't very popular.
But that's still a kind of positive reason for your vote, rationale for your vote.
Voting against the Tories?
Well, because you've got an idea of what you want.
Which
you're doing it to get this. So you're doing it to get something that perhaps shares some of your values.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, if let's say Green voters voted tactically at the last general election, do you think they're looking at the current government saying, "Oh yeah, this is a government that is appealing to my values"?
Perhaps not.
I don't think so, and I think they will have woken up on the election day quite happy because the Tories are gone, but then they see that there's not really much difference anyway.
Yeah, I guess I'm still bearing the scars of our campaign in Runcorn recently. Where, you know, the response on the doorstep wasn't particularly, I'm voting tactically. It was very much, I'm not voting, or I'm voting just to get them out. It's a very negative way of voting.
Yeah.
So I kind of lost the thread of where we're going with this. So
one other thing,
PR. Let's back to PR.
Well, one other thing that comes up, you often hear people say, "We voted on this in 2011."
Oh, we did. Yes.
Did we? What did we vote on in 2011?
We voted on one particular form of PR, which I think wasn't the.
It's not a form of PR.
I didn't like it.
It's called an alternative vote.
Okay.
Do you remember what I said about
That's
PR
right.
isn't a voting system? It's a sign that your voting system is proportional. That's what we've got to think about. Alternative vote, David Cameron actually admitted that it would have led to a parliament that was potentially less proportionate than first past the post.
Okay.
And the reason that the Conservatives agreed to this is that when they looked at certain modelling and said, actually, we might do better under alternative vote. So they weren't worried about it, whether they won or lost.
Okay.
So it wasn't proportional representation.
I voted against it. You probably weren't old enough to vote, were you?
I wasn't, but I was generally against it.
Okay.
Because it wasn't a good solution.
Right.
The thing with alternative vote, and it's pretty much what they've got in Australia, actually, for the federal election. So Anthony Albanese, as you know, won the re-election last week. Maybe this week, losing track of days. An alternative vote, you rank your candidates. Excuse me. You rank the candidates and you say, I want this person's top, then this person second, and so on.
Yeah.
Count up the votes. If none of them have got 50%, then people's second choices are allocated. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The reason I'm against it is because, first, it doesn't increase the chance of proportionality, but also you might have a candidate that's really, really popular, like absolutely loved by 49% of the public, and then the other 51% really, really don't like that candidate, but they don't really care who else it is. So it's quite negative. So people can rally behind a different candidate that's not actually going to do anything exciting.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
I do.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, at the moment, the SDP are looking at all our policies, aren't we?
Yeah.
And reviewing all our policies. But at the moment, what we say on PR is that we like a system that I think you don't actually like very much. Is that right?
No, I think we're advocating for a similar one to what Scotland has for the Holyrood elections,
Okay.
which is fine, and I don't have a massive problem with it. I think we have to accept that, and I mean this is something similar to the House of Lords when we're talking to Peter Ramsey.
Yeah.
I'm in favour of retaining the House of Lords, but if we can actually move past this sort of weird political deadlock we've got when we're just completely stagnant as a country,
Yeah.
I'm happy to make some compromises and say, okay, if that future political system doesn't include the House of Lords,
Yeah.
or it's one with mixed member proportionality, like is in the SDP manifesto, great, because that means that we've actually improved from the one we've got. I can't think there's, and I could be fact checked on this by somebody, but I don't think a country has ever gone from a form of proportional representation to first past the post, whereas many countries have gone from first past the post to proportional representation. And I think the biggest thing that people are reticent to go along with PR is that it's the comfortable, the safe thing of first past the post, right? People are a bit nervous to go for something different, and they're like, I'm not sure about that, it's changed, I'm not sure. And I'd say, well, the current system, are you happy with it?
Okay. So all this is kind of really interesting, kind of theoretical stuff.
Yeah.
What if people really want to change the voting system? What might we be doing about that?
So there's an organisation called Make Votes Matter,
Yeah.
which are lobbying for a change to the voting system.
Okay.
They think that will come two ways that could come. Or well, they think the best way of it happening is for the Labour Party to adopt it. Now, 75% of Labour members voted for proportional representation at the 2022 Labour conference. However, they didn't then adopt it in the manifesto, and they had a throwaway line for it. One of the issues is that as soon as a party gets into a place where they can actually make some change, why would they? Because they would be changing the system which propelled them to power.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So they think, Make Votes Matter, think the most likely way of doing it is through the Labour Party.
Okay.
Because Conservatives are naturally opposed, not just because first past the post has helped them so much in elections, but also because I think it's more of a conservative tendency to oppose change.
Yes.
And they think it's most likely going to come through a citizens' assembly, which I know you're not too keen on.
I don't like those, no.
Yeah. But if anybody wants to get involved, check out Make Votes Matter. And I think we should have a bit of a cross-party campaign because we do have a party on the right now which is in favour of proportional representation reform.
Okay.
Put some money in the swear jar.
Yeah.
The Lib Dems are in favour of it. Green Party's in favour of it. We're in favour of it.
Okay.
So I think we could have a bit of a cross-party campaign.
The Tories might be now, do you think?
There was one Tory MP that had signed up to the Make Votes Matter pledge.
That's interesting.
The MP for St Ives.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you, Sebastian. That's been a good teaching on PR. I thought it might get more mathsy than that, so...
I tried to keep the maths out of it.
Well done. Good. But that's been really helpful. Thank you. Hope people enjoyed hearing some of the feedback as well from some of our other listeners and viewers.
Yeah. If you're watching this on YouTube, just comment your favourite voting system in the YouTube comments, because I will very much enjoy reading that.
He will read them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So thanks for joining us. As always, subscribe, follow, like, and tell all your friends to watch Take Me Home. See you next time.